The Coffin Tragedy. On October 30th, 1990, Halloween Eve, magician Joseph Burrows stood before a crowd at Blackbeard's Family Fund Center in Fresno, California. He was 32 years old, known as Amazing Joe. He'd built his reputation on dangerous escape acts. That night, he was attempting his most dangerous stunt yet. Burrows was going to be buried alive, not just in dirt, but in cement. 7 tons of it. He'd done a similar trick before, using only dirt, and escaped successfully. But the dirt trick wasn't dramatic enough anymore. He wanted something bigger, something that would make headlines. At about 9:30 p.m., the trick started. A glass coffin sat in a 7-foot deep pit. Burrows climbed inside. The lid was sealed. Crew members began pouring dirt onto the coffin, then wet cement. The crowd watched as tons of material piled on top of the glass box. Burrows was supposed to escape within minutes, pick the locks, push open the lid, and climb out. He'd practiced, timed it. Everything should work. But as more cement was added, something went tragically wrong. The glass began to crack. The combined weight of soil and cement was too much. The coffin wasn't engineered for that load. Nobody had calculated the pressure properly. Then suddenly, the glass shattered. 7 tons of cement and dirt collapsed onto Burrows. The coffin was crushed instantly. Burrows was trapped inside, buried under tons of wet cement. No air, no space, no escape. The crowd realized something was wrong. Crew members started digging frantically trying to reach him. But moving 7 tons of cement by hand takes time. Too much time! The paramedics arrived, brought equipment. They kept digging. 30 minutes passed before they reached the coffin. When they finally pulled Burrows out, he was dead. He had suffocated under the weight of his own stunt. The Milk Can Tragedy. On November 9th, 1930, magician Gilbert Ginesta prepared for his signature trick in Frankfort, Kentucky. The milk can escape. A classic Houdini stunt. Ginesta had performed it dozens of times. He'd climb into a large metal milk can filled with water. Assistants would lock the lid with padlocks and chains. Then he'd escape within minutes. The audience gathered. The milk can was filled with water. Ginesta climbed inside. The lid was placed on top. Padlocks secured it. Chains wrapped around. Everything looked standard. Just another performance. But something was different. During transport to the venue, the milk can had been dropped and damaged. Dented. The sides had been compressed inward. The can was narrower than usual. But nobody noticed. Or if they did, they thought it didn't matter. Ginesta, submerged in the water, started working on the locks. He'd done this hundreds of times. He knew every step. But inside the dented can, he couldn't move properly. His body didn't fit the same way. His arms couldn't reach the right angles. Time passed. The audience watched the curtain hiding the milk can. They expected to see Ginesta emerge any moment, but he didn't appear. His assistants grew worried. Something was taking too long. They rushed to the can, started removing the locks, pulled off the chains, and opened the lid. Ginesta was found unconscious, floating in the water. They pulled him out, tried to revive him, but he wasn't breathing, wasn't responding. He was rushed to the hospital, and a few days later, Gilbert Ginesta died from asphyxiation and drowning. The underwater escape. On June 16, 2019, magician Chanchya Lahiri stood on the banks of the Hooghly River in Kolkata, India. He was 40 years old, known professionally as Jadoogar Mondra. He specialized in escape acts, Houdini-style stunts. That day, he was attempting an underwater escape. Lahiri was shackled with 6 locks and chains. A steel cage was locked around him. He was blindfolded. Hundreds of spectators gathered near the Howrah Bridge. They'd come to watch him escape. Cameras were ready. Police were present. It was a public spectacle. A crane lifted Lahiri in his cage, moved him over the river. The crowd watched as he dangled above the water. Then the crane lowered him down into the Hooghly River. The water was murky, fast-moving, deep. In a few minutes, Lahiri disappeared beneath the surface. The plan was simple. He'd pick the locks underwater, break free from the chains, escape the cage, and swim to the surface. But then the unexpected happened. The crowd waited, but Lahiri didn't surface. That was when they knew something had gone wrong. People started getting nervous. Divers went into the river, searched the murky water. The current was strong. Visibility was near zero. Still, they couldn't find him. Hours later, Police continued searching downstream. The next day, Lahiri's body was found about a kilometer away. He drowned, never escaped the cage, never picked the locks, just sank to the bottom, and died. He'd gone into that river believing he could escape, but he couldn't, and nobody could save him in time. The bullet catch? In November 1820, in Prussia, a magician known as Madame Dinsky prepared for one of magic's most dangerous tricks, the bullet catch. Assistants would fire guns at her. She would catch the bullets, or at least appear to. The trick relied on sleight of hand, blank rounds, and careful preparation. That evening, she performed before an audience that included members of the Prussian court, nobility, wealthy patrons, high expectations. Dolinsky was confident. She'd performed the bullet catch before. She knew the mechanics and trusted her assistants. Then the trick began. Her assistants loaded the guns. At least they were supposed to load blanks, prepared rounds that would make noise and flash, but fire nothing lethal. That was the trick. The audience didn't know the guns were harmless. During the performance, Dinsky would stand calmly as 6 riflemen discharged their weapons, and she would appear to stop every bullet. The soldiers were instructed to use blanks, but in a fatal error, one man loaded a live round. The firing squad aimed at her. The audience held their breath. This was the moment, the climax of the performance. Then the guns fired. The sound was deafening. Smoke filled the stage. Dinsky should have been standing, should have been holding up the caught bullets and taking her bow. But Dolinsky was down on the stage floor, blood spreading. One of the guns had fired a real round. The shot struck Dolinsky in the abdomen. The court audience was horrified. Nobility screamed. People rushed to help, but the damage was done. Dinsky had been shot. She died 2 days later from her injuries. The razor swallow. On July 11, 1938, magician Vivian Hensley was performing at home for his son in Brisbane, Australia. Hensley was 43 years old, a comic performer known for his razor swallowing trick. It wasn't meant to be real. It was sleight of hand, misdirection, and timing, a clever illusion that made audiences gasp. In his act, Hensley would pretend to toss a razor blade into his open mouth. In reality, he'd palm the blade, hide it against his hand, and slip it discreetly into his coat sleeve while pretending to chew and swallow. Then, with a flourish, he'd pass his hand before his mouth and make the blade reappear, safe and gleaming, as if plucked from thin air. That afternoon, Hensley decided to demonstrate the trick at home for his son, a small, casual performance of a father showing his boy how magic worked. But this time, something went terribly wrong. As Hensley mimed the motion, the razor slipped from his fingers. Before he could react, the real blade flew back into his throat. Reflexively, he swallowed. There was no illusion now, only a real sharp razor lodged deep inside his esophagus. He felt it immediately. A slicing pain that made him choke and cough. His family rushed him to the hospital. Doctors took X-ray. The blade was deep, beyond easy reach. Surgeons operated, searching for it, but the metal had already begun cutting through internal tissue as it moved downward. Over the next 4 days, infection and internal bleeding set in despite every attempt to save him. Vivian Hensley's injuries worsened. He died from the internal damage caused by the swallowed razor. The car escaped. In 1930, in Springfontein, South Africa, Charles Rohan, known on stage as Car the Magician, prepared for one of his most dangerous stunts. He was an escape artist who thrived on danger. Straight jackets, chains, shards of glass, but this time he was pushing the limits of time itself. The act was simple in theory, deadly in execution. Car would be bound tightly in a straitjacket and laid out on a road. From nearly 600 feet away, a car would speed toward him at 45 miles per hour. He had only 10 to 15 seconds to free himself and dive out of the way before the vehicle hit. The crowd gathered. Men, women, even children stood watching. The air was tense.
Car gave the signal.
Assistants strapped him in, pulling the jacket tight. The car engine revved in the distance, echoing across the dusty road. Then the driver accelerated. Tires screeched. The car shot forward. Car twisted, pulled, yanked at the leather straps, biting into his arms. He'd done this before. He knew the rhythm of escape. The body movements, the breathing, the split-second timing. But the seconds were disappearing faster than his hands could move. The car was closing in. 50 yards. 30. 10. People began shouting, "Move! Move!" But he couldn't free himself. A moment later, the car struck him. The impact was brutal. The bumper smashed into his leg, almost severing it. The crowd screamed. The car skidded to a stop as car collapsed onto the ground, bleeding heavily. He was still conscious when they reached him. His breathing was shallow and his face pale. Before he lost consciousness, he spoke his last words to the terrified driver who just hit him. He told him it wasn't his fault. Minutes later, Charles Rowan, Carr, the magician, was dead. The theater tragedy. On March 23, 1918, magician William Ellsworth Robinson was performing at the Wood Green Empire Theatre in London. He was 56 years old, known professionally as Chung Ling Soo. He wasn't Chinese. He was an American magician who had built his fame on illusion. A man who lived entirely in disguise. For years, he'd spoken only through interpreters, never breaking character, even offstage. That night's act featured his signature trick, the bullet catch. Assistants would fire loaded rifles at him. He would catch the bullets on a small porcelain plate. It was the most dangerous trick in magic and the most famous. Soo's version relied on a special two-chambered rifle. One chamber held a live bullet which he displayed to the audience for realism. The other chamber contained only a paper cartridge used to produce the flash and smoke of a blank round. When performed correctly, the bullet never left the gun. It was illusion, precision, and timing. But that particular night, something was different. Unknown to anyone. Unburned gunpowder residue from previous performances had built up inside the barrel. Soo's assistant, responsible for cleaning the rifles, hadn't done it properly. The powder stayed trapped, packed near the chamber. Then the lights dimmed. The crowd fell silent. Soo took his mark, dressed in his elaborate robes, standing tall under the spotlights. His two assistants raised their rifles and pulled the trigger. The guns exploded in smoke and thunder. Only this time, one rifle fired for real. The built-up powder ignited, launching the live bullet from the other barrel straight into Soo's chest. The force staggered him. He clutched his side, his robe darkening with blood. For a moment, the audience thought it was part of the act, until Soo collapsed. Crew members rushed to him. He was taken to the hospital, but the bullet had pierced his lung. He died the next morning from his injuries. The Lion's Bride. On May 9, 1911, Jikamunto Nyuberuga, better known to the world as the Great Lafayette, took the stage at the Empire Palace Theatre in Edinburgh, Scotland. At 40 years old, he was one of the highest-paid magicians alive, a perfectionist to the core. Lafayette didn't just perform magic, he lived it. That, and his dog. Her name was Beauty, a small terrier given to him by none other than Harry Houdini. And no, Beauty wasn't just a dog. She traveled everywhere with him, slept on her own velvet bed, ate 5-course meals, and wore a diamond-studded collar. Wherever Lafayette went, Beauty followed. Then, 4 days before the premiere of his new Edinburgh show, Beauty suddenly died. Lafayette was devastated. He grieved, and then did what performers do. He went on. That night, the Empire Palace was packed. Lafayette was in the middle of his signature illusion, the Lion's Bride, a full theatrical overload. Lavish costumes, a live lion on stage. Complex sets, flaming lanterns throwing dramatic shadows across the theater. And then something went wrong. One of those lanterns caught a stage curtain on fire. At first, no one reacted. The audience assumed it was intentional, just another dramatic flourish from a man famous for pushing spectacle to its limits. But seconds later, the fire spread, scenery ignited. Ropes caught. Curtains overhead went up in flames. The illusion was over. The stage was burning. Panic exploded. Performers ran. The audience surged toward the exits. Most people made it out. Backstage, however, everything fell apart. Lafayette escaped through a side door, choking on smoke, his clothes blackened with soot. He was alive. He was safe. Then he heard it, the whinny of a horse still trapped inside. Without stopping, without thinking, ignoring every shout to stay back, Lafayette turned around and ran straight into the fire to save the animal. He never came back out. When firefighters finally put the blaze out, they discovered 11 bodies inside the theater. The side doors had been locked before the show, a rule Lafayette himself insisted on to prevent anyone sneaking in without paying. That decision sealed the fate of his crew. The next day, rescuers found a charred body wearing Lafayette's ornate costume and jewelry. Authorities believed it was him. He was buried beside Beauty and Pierce Cemetery. Magician and dog reunited at last. If you want more strange, tragic, and unbelievable stories like this, make sure to subscribe and leave suggestions for the next video in the comments.